The trauma bay at Ashford Memorial had seen its share of chaos, but nothing like the storm that rolled in on a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn. Sirens screamed outside, gurneys rattled through swinging doors, and Dr. Marcus Bellwether, chief of surgery, stood at the center of it all like a general surveying a battlefield he alone commanded. He was a man who had built his reputation on control of his operating room, control of his staff, and above all, control of the narrative that everyone at Ashford answered to him. Which was exactly why the quiet nurse in Bay 4 had always unsettled him. Her name was Elena Cross. She had joined the hospital 8 months earlier, transferring in from a rural clinic upstate, or so her file said. She kept her head down, worked double shifts without complaint, and moved through the ward with an economy of motion that some found impressive and others found strange. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. She never joined the nurses for coffee break gossip. And when trauma cases came in screaming and bleeding, Elena's hands never shook, not once, not ever, which was the detail that had begun to gnaw at Bellwether in a way he couldn't quite name. That Tuesday, an 18-wheeler had jackknifed on the interstate, and the emergency room filled with casualties faster than the staff could triage them. Bellwether took command of the worst case, a construction worker with a crushed chest cavity, blood pressure crashing, minutes from coding. He barked orders. Nurses scrambled. And in the middle of the controlled chaos, Elena Cross did something that made the entire room go still. She corrected him. Not loudly. Not disrespectfully. She simply said, in a voice too calm for the moment, "Doctor, the entry wound trajectory suggests a lacerated subclavian, not the aorta. If you open there, you'll lose him in 90 seconds. Bellwether froze, scalpel in hand, staring at a nurse who had no business second-guessing a chief surgeon of 23 years. But something in her eyes stopped him from snapping back immediately, a flatness, an absolute certainty that had nothing to do with nursing school confidence and everything to do with something else entirely. He hesitated a half-second too long, then adjusted his approach. The patient lived. Nobody thanked her. Bellwether's ego, however, did not forget. By the following morning, word had spread through the hospital in the way rumors do, mutated, exaggerated, weaponized. Bellwether stood before the hospital board that afternoon and painted Elena's intervention not as a life-saving correction but as reckless insubordination, a nurse overstepping catastrophically in a room where lives hung on hierarchy and obedience. He cited unprofessional conduct, unauthorized medical opinion, and, when pressed, admitted the patient had survived, but insisted that was luck, not competence. The board, eager to avoid controversy and unwilling to challenge their most decorated surgeon, suspended Elena Cross pending investigation, effective immediately. She received the news standing in the hallway outside the boardroom, dressed in scrubs still faintly stained from the trauma the day before. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply nodded, removed her ID badge, and set it on the reception desk with a quiet click that seemed to echo far louder than it should have. Nurses in the hallway exchanged uneasy glances. Something about her composure felt less like defeat and more like patience, the patience of someone who had weathered far worse than a hospital politics dispute and knew this one wasn't worth a fight. She was 3 steps from the exit doors when they swung open from the outside, and a man walked in who changed everything. He was tall, weathered in the particular way that spoke of years spent somewhere far harsher than hospital corridors, deep-set eyes, a jaw that hadn't fully relaxed in a long time, movements economical and precise like a man who had trained his body to never waste energy. He wore a plain jacket, nothing that announced who he was, but the moment he stepped through those doors, something in the air shifted. Security guards near the entrance straightened without quite knowing why. He scanned the lobby once, the way soldiers do, not looking for a person, but assessing a room, and then his eyes landed on Elena. He stopped cold. "Raven," he said, and the single word landed in the lobby like a dropped weight. Elena's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did, a flicker of recognition, resignation, maybe even the ghost of relief. The receptionist looked between them, confused. Bellwether, who had followed her out to make certain his authority was witnessed being enforced, stopped mid-stride, the smug satisfaction draining slowly from his face as the stranger crossed the lobby in 6 long strides. "Do you know this man?" Bellwether demanded, some instinct telling him the ground beneath his righteous little scene had just shifted violently. The man ignored him entirely. His attention was locked on Elena, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked with something between disbelief and reverence. 3 years. 3 years I thought you were dead. Sandstorm Extraction, Kandahar, Command told us Operator Raven didn't make it out. Half my unit still lights a candle for you every deployment anniversary. He shook his head slowly, taking in the hospital scrubs, the quiet unassuming posture, all of it utterly at odds with the reputation clearly stitched into his memory. "You're a nurse now." The lobby had gone entirely silent. Every nurse, every orderly, every visitor within earshot turned to stare. Bellwether's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, no sound emerging. "Explain," Bellwether finally managed, though his voice had lost every trace of its earlier authority. "Explain what he's talking about. Right now." The man, whose name, staff would later learn, was Master Chief James Torres, a decorated Navy SEAL with 2 decades of Special Operations service, turned to Bellwether with an expression that could have frozen the Trauma Bay's saline. "You suspended her," he said slowly, as though tasting the absurdity of the sentence. "You suspended Operator Raven for correcting your diagnosis." He let out a short, disbelieving breath that was almost a laugh, except there was no humor in it. "Doctor, this woman ran forward surgical teams in 3 combat theaters. She's stabilized gunshot wounds in the dark, under fire, with a headlamp and a knife when there was no war for 400 miles. She's saved more lives on dirt floors than most surgeons save in an entire career behind marble hospital walls. And you're disciplining her for telling you where to cut." Bellwether's face had gone the color of old parchment. The board members who had gathered in the doorway, drawn by the commotion, exchanged glances that suggested careers were quietly ending in real time. Somewhere behind the nurse's station, a phone had already begun recording. Elena finally spoke, her voice as level as it had been in the trauma bay the day before. "I didn't come here to be recognized, James. I came here to disappear. To help people without the weight of what I used to be." She glanced at Bellwether, and for the first time, something sharper moved behind her calm. But apparently even disappearing has its limits when men refuse to be corrected by a woman they've already decided doesn't matter. The silence that followed was the loudest sound the hospital lobby had heard in years. If this story pulled you in, don't stop here. The next chapter goes even deeper into who Elena Cross really was, what happened to Operator Raven's unit, and how Bellwether's suspension became the very thing that unraveled his career. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. These stories only get more intense from here, and you'll want to be there when the truth fully comes out.